Hey everyone, welcome back to Demand Gen Live Tuesday nights. Love being here with all of you. We got a great crew that keeps growing and looking forward to diving into this agenda. Um, and I don't think any announcements today. Only announcement, there was an event that was planned for this Thursday. We postponed it, so we'll get back on track with that next month. So anyone that was registered on Thursday at 12 p.m., that event is no longer happening. But be sure to check the next one. We got Dave Gerhard coming back for one in early November, and then we'll be doing another keynote series in the middle of November. So stay tuned for those. And now moving into the agenda, and we're just going to get right into it here. We cover so many topics on this event, and we do it so frequently that sometimes it's like, what kind of topics we're going to cover here? And so I have a couple of ones that I was thinking about, and they're purely spurred through either the work that I've been doing with companies or some of the conversations, like strategy and annual planning conversations I've been having, and some of the key components that I've pulled out. So we're going to get into the first topic here, which is the most overlooked part of demand gen. And so I'll kind of back up just a little bit here, is that I was having a conversation with someone. It was actually just this afternoon, and they were talking through all the metrics that they're measuring and all the technology that they're using and all the ad channels that they're using and the amount of budget that they're doing and the amount of leads that they're collecting. And it just felt like one big type of it just feels like a machine where prospects are numbers and things like that. And then I looked at them and was like, but do you even check whether or not people are consuming the message, like that you're actually effectively communicating with your buyers? And so that is the most the most overlooked part of demand gen in B2B, is the idea that you actually have to create information that then that information gets communicated to your buyer and the buyer understands it. And there's actually a lot of complexity in that, and I'm surprised at how few people do it. Marketers usually don't look at this because they think it's the responsibility of the sales team to do that. But I've said it before and I'll say it again. It's 2021. Marketing needs to be able to communicate these things to buyers and drive buying processes at scale. And so, if you really simplify down to the true definition or the key important part in demand gen for me, it's that marketers need to open up direct lines of communication with their customers through whatever channel, right? Podcast, Facebook ads, LinkedIn ads, LinkedIn organic, email, doing a weekly meetup that isn't recorded for a podcast. There's plenty of different ways, but you need to open up direct lines of communication with customers. You need to have that place where you're putting messages out and people are receptive to them and consuming the message, and then they're learning something. And so there's two components here. There's one is the message, and then the second part is the distribution to whether or not it's actually being consumed. And so I had a couple examples. We've been talking a bit about how companies don't invest enough in content and creative. They invest enough in SEO content. But if you're looking to go and win in dark social, you actually need completely different content from a overall like strategy, format, different things like that. And so real quick story, I was talking to the company, and they brought up the idea that they were running a lot of display ads, and they were using it for, they were like, yeah, and we're doing it all for air cover. It's like $15,000 a month. And when anyone mentions the term air cover as a B2B marketer, what that means is that those campaigns definitely don't drive results. It's like, we can't measure it. We don't care. It's just air cover. We'll just throw it out there and not scrutinize it at all. And so kind of lost my train of thought there. So I'm going to pause there and see if people have any questions.
No questions so far, but I'll shoot one at you. Why do you think this is so overlooked? And then the part two of this is, if I'm a marketer in an organization where this is happening, what are some things I can do to overcome this? And so let's get tactical and actionable for the community.
Yeah, and so I think the reason that it's overlooked, I kind of alluded to it before, is that historically marketers were not really responsible for they didn't think that they were responsible for doing this, but marketing's always been responsible for communicating messages to buyers. But in B2B, for whatever reason, it's been about collecting contacts to give to your sales team to do sales. And so the unlock for me when I first started to look at this stuff was that in like 2017, I was running gated content with what I thought was a very effective piece of content to my buyers through Facebook and LinkedIn ads, where they would actually download the content and then they would get pushed through into HubSpot marketing automation and then get an email with the content. And then I tracked how many people actually opened the PDF. And less than 1 out of 10 people did it, even opened it, let alone read a significant part of it. And that was the moment that I realized it's not only about collecting the email address, it's about, is this message being consumed? And that brought me down a whole track of ungating content, trying to do more work natively inside of the feed, just seeing how much more effective, as you work within the way that buyers want to use the platforms, how much more effective you can communicate with them. And so that's the reason. What was the second part of the question?
So if I'm a marketer at a company where this is occurring, what are some things that I can do to make a change? If this is so common, it's likely a lot of people are up against this. And so what do I do if I'm a marketer to overcome this obstacle, show leadership the light?
So I've been trying to help people, specifically leadership, understand this in a different way, which is if this is executed effectively, you're basically running sales at scale. Where instead of putting prospects in a meeting when they don't want to be in a meeting and they're not that interested in buying, and then having your sales rep try and tell them things when they're not receptive to them. So instead of doing that, just having your marketing team communicate all the things that your salesperson would in person at scale to all of your buyers, so that all the market knows more about those things. And you're basically, if done effectively, running a new form of a demo to your customers all the time, in a way that's just flat out more effective and more cost efficient to do it. And so before, if you look at like a traditional funnel, sales was the main filter for stuff. So marketing just generated MQLs, and then sales was then filtering out, are these people good? Do they want to buy? Which created tons of inefficiencies at the SDR level and the AE level to process through people. And if you just looked at the data, you would be able to predict that these people are not going to buy because the patterns are there. And so instead of doing that in 2018, around there, I made the decision that as a marketer, I will be the filter for my sales team. So instead of my sales team needing to spend 30 minutes, 2 hours, months of time running the sales process that will most likely move to close lost, I will do that for them, and I will prioritize the ones that they have a very high probability to win. And with the rest of their time, they probably have things that they could do that are a lot more productive than following up with marketing leads that don't close. And so it's just a different way of looking at it here. And I think just a more modern way to go to market.
Yeah. And as you were talking, I had an idea, because we talk a lot about the importance of talking to customers, right? We bring that up all of the time. It's interesting if you think about doing almost like a win analysis of, recent closed won business and asking about how they became aware of the company, what the buying process was like. There could be an interesting angle there to speak to recently acquired customers to validate that and figure out a way to get those customers in front of leadership. Whenever I was running CS at an org and I needed to convince leadership of something, I would find ways to get them in front of customers. And so this could be an interesting way to kind of prove that point by having the customer say it directly to the team. So just another angle to consider. Totally.
Like the number one thing in anything of marketing is start with the customer, start with the buyer. This marketing model that we have here didn't just get made up out of nowhere. 5 years of just listening to people about this is the way that I want to buy. This is where I go when I want to do this. I want to complete these steps in the process without ever talking to someone. These are the places that I do it. When I'm ready, I'm going to do this, and this is what I want as an outcome. And it's just just listening to what people tell you, and then people will be like, oh, but my buyer's different. My buyer wants to get cold called. My buyer wants to discover us in a trade magazine like it's 1998. And it's just not. Like, what I found across the board as I work with tons of companies that target different buyers, from InfoSec, IT security, finance, marketing, sales, HR and people, like a lot of, verticalized companies into construction and nonprofit and other places. Like, this buying behavior is happening across the board. It's not happening with just one individual type of person. There are nuances between people, but the shift is across the board. And then I realized where I kind of got lost at the beginning, so I'm going to get back on track, which is that you have the message and then you have the distribution. And so, and then both of those pieces need to work. And so a couple of analogies, like I think a couple of weeks ago, I talked through the idea, if you thought about LinkedIn ads as a way that you could run a television commercial or a billboard ad to your buyers every single day, how that would be different. And so part of that, like a huge part of that strategy, is not just buying the ads. It is about the message and how the message is packaged and whether or not that captures attention and communicates something. And B2B companies don't spend enough time on that side. They actually don't spend a lot of time on to guarantee distribution and consumption either. But on the actual content side, it would be like Procter and Gamble running television commercials and then spending like $5,000 to make a video. That's what B2B companies do right now. They go out and they spend $300,000 a month on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn ads, and they spend $5,000 on creative and content. And it floods the audience within like $5,000 and just complete diminishing returns on the other $295,000 after that. So it's like taking $300,000, buying a Ferrari, and then putting water in the gas tank. Pretty much what people are doing. Another example is that if you were going to make a keynote speech at a conference, and so you're at the conference, people are paying attention, and then you actually make the keynote, and it sucks and nobody pays attention to it, and people are leaving in the middle, like the message wasn't good. You had companies have the distribution. It's very easy to go out and pick your buyers, to figure out which channels they actually pay attention on, and then put something in front of them. That's black and white and easy. You can guarantee impressions by using ads. The secret is whether or not you communicate effectively to move them forward in a buying process or in their journey. I'm glad I got that in there. Cool. Let's pause and see if we have questions.
A few people have some questions, maybe taking us down a slightly different track. You want to open it up for a little Q&A bit?
Down for whatever. Yeah.
Tackle the other one later. All right, Carl, I'm going to bring you on, the DGL OG. It's about buyers, so sort of related to our topic. Carl, you're on Demand Gen Live.
Hey, Chris. Hey, everybody.
What's up, Carl?
Hey, so I do have a question and kind of a little bit of a story time back to how buyers buy. So the question is, what we're looking to do is we're noticing we want to target, or we're not getting clients from specific geographical area. So our marketing right now is nationwide, North American wide, and now moving to international. But there are specific geographical areas that it's just not converting. So it's funny because the story that relates to that is I got into a meeting with sales, and they're like, Carl, these people are traditional. I'm like, I don't know what that means, because they don't respond to digital well. I don't know what that means. So I said, well, they like to talk with their peers. It's like, okay, what does that mean? It's like, well, they go in these chat groups and they talk to each other and we can't reach them. It's like, wow, I've heard that before. And then so what I've heard from when people go on our show, get on prospects, that a lot of our clients make decisions in these small regional groups. And these regional groups, they go in chats, they go in their own groups, and they actually don't allow vendors in them, and they make, they meet every quarter, they make the decisions in these groups and so on. So I'm like, oh, where have I heard that before? It's pretty straightforward. And what we also heard is that some people in these groups are more influential than others. So, we closed the client where that client actually, before they even took a meeting with us, they called another of our clients, said, hey, how is working for, how is working for your company? And if it's good enough for you, it's good enough for me. That was the exact quote. So, and once they said yes, it was that close was in like 25 days. So going back to the question,
pretty much what happens, you know what I mean? Right. Like you're picking one geographical region, but this happens everywhere.
So my thing was like, oh, this is too easy, because the initial thought was, hey, we should do sponsor events. We should go to golf courses. I was like, no, don't do that. You just told me exactly what we want to do. So the first thing I was thinking is, hey, I need to invite these influencers or all these people onto our show. That's a pretty straightforward that I wanted to do. So we've got several of them lined up. But I know the next thing is, there's a really, really want to press to do these events, because people start thinking they're traditional and they don't talk, like they don't respond to the normal nuances of our marketing. So what other ways can we do in addition to obviously some of the geographical targeting, or bring folks onto our shows and really driving that place? What are some of the other things that we could do from a specific geographical region? And one last point is, this is the home base of our major competitor. Like they pretty much, this is their, like a lot of the companies are in that Southeast region. So now we've done well everyone else. We want to now go after that last bastion of our competitor. Mm-hmm. So where would we go from here?
Yeah, you kind of beat me to the punch here. So you said the region is Southeastern US. Yeah. The answer that I was going to pull is that, in my experience, typically when this is happening, it has very little to do with the marketing. So for instance, like our company in 2017 was like, we have like no accounts in New England. Our sales reps are starving. Let's put together like specific campaigns on for just the hospitals in New England. And then you do a little bit of research and you're like, well, there's only 3 hospital groups and they're all in long-term agreements with our competitor. So we can market if we want, but we're not going to close any deals they're in at least 3-year contracts. And so if you didn't look and do that as a marketer, you could just spend weeks, months, quarters putting together marketing campaigns for people that are not going to buy for totally reasons outside of general marketing. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing to think about. And then this, like, in me personally, like I would much rather sell to accounts that don't have a solution than try and displace a competitor, especially in that type of space. And so it's about also trying to decide on where you focus your energy and money for the biggest return. And so if you are like equipped in doing this, I would recommend kind of like, is there something specific to the Southeast that you're going to market? Otherwise, I would continue with like national campaigns. And like, is there something specific about the buyer? Someone else asked me this earlier. Let me see if I can figure out how to communicate it to you. It's like they were having regional field marketing events that were virtual and had no specific content to the region. So it's like, why wouldn't you just do it for everybody? It would be like right now if we had Demand Gen Live, but only for people in Massachusetts. Everybody else needs to go home. You know what I mean? So I would my personal thing is to continue to market nationally. You can, carve off a place and put more targeting or more budget to that region. But thinking about how to like re-architect a whole mix probably wouldn't be my first recommendation.
I think the other key point here is that, so one of our big pushes this year is mid-market, because mm-hmm. we are doing very well in the enterprise, and we recognize that our competitor has those enterprises. So there's 2 points. One's like, if we can get one or two of those dominoes to fall, then it makes it easier from a client, like that peer recommendation, they'll fall the same way. Because we've noticed that like in different areas, like all we need is one and it falls. Like it just, the dominoes happen because they all
People talk.
are like one. Yeah. So it's like once one group changes, because they're all in that group, they all talk to each other, everything falls. So I think it's sort of that thinking, but also in the Southeast, where we really want that mid-market, and we know that our competitor doesn't have that mid-market. So that's why we're also targeting there. So that's sort of like the two-pronged look at that.
Yeah. So I think it's all like, Carl, your company's pretty far up to speed with our strategy, right? And having good results. And so I think it's like, it's thinking about how you could adjust paid socials a little bit to hit those people more with a message that's more relevant, that's targeted there. That's one option. Carve off a segment. More more hyper personalized campaigns for that type of segment so that it's more relevant. That's one thing that you can do. And then influencer events, podcast, like get the dark social going. Like I feel like you already have the answer. You're just kind of looking for validation.
Yeah, I just need to know if there's like anything else that you've seen or done in the past, because it when we're like, it goes back to international too, because it's like, okay, we're not getting traction, and now we're starting to tailor some of our messages, or like, bring that international person into the show. So it's like, oh, do we do the exact same from a more of a North America spot? It's like, oh, let's bring that micro influencer onto the show too. But I know our sales teams are getting like a little itchy to get going, because they're not seeing it. And we're seeing the consumption metrics that we're seeing from our content, paid social, everything is doing well, but nothing's translating to opportunities. But I know we've only been doing it for like a couple of months.
Yeah.
But it's like, if you see our maps, you're like there's a hole in that Southeast region. So that's sort of like, what can we do now too? But we also know that's the home base of our major competitor too.
So I think you kind of got the playbook. The thing I'll caution you on is in 2018, like the stuff that I was basically running this strategy in 2018, targeting physicians with a high budget, and it was driving tons of pipeline that was closing in the US. And so that stuff started to work. And then the company started to see hundreds of thousands of dollars of new revenue coming through those channels. And then the first thing they wanted to do is say, let's go to the UK, Germany, and Brazil.
Yeah.
And then what happens is you go from one market, which is by far the biggest opportunity market in the world for that product. And then you go to 3 lower priority markets where we have competitors that are based in those countries, where we don't have a strong sales presence, where we don't have a ton of awareness, and you spread out budget, and you might win. So it's a distraction for the demand team. It's takes budget from all focused in one place to spread out. You got questions and have to deal with lead routing and handoffs in international markets. You're doing a ton of stuff with that. And then all of a sudden you had this stuff working, this massive opportunity in the US, and all of a sudden you don't even realize how much you're missing out on opportunity because you're doing all these other things. Yeah. So that's kind of the caution that I give to people, because companies always want to continue to expand. In my experience, people think that they're like, oh, the US market is maxed out, I need to go to the next place, when they've like barely scratched the surface of what's possible. Yeah. Like right now, like between our podcast and LinkedIn, like LinkedIn's a international platform, so is the podcast, but you get what I'm saying here is like, yeah, we've barely scratched the surface. Like people think that right now, like what we're doing with the podcast reach and LinkedIn is a lot. Like I know that there's a ton more. I know that we've barely scratched the surface. And so I'm just trying to help people see like the potential upside in these things is so high. And most people just because they don't have a lot of experience with marketing, specifically executives that are non-marketers, just think that the opportunity is capped. And so, okay, we've done all that we can in the US, which is like 3% of what we actually could do. And so we have to go to a bunch of other markets to get more growth, which is typically not true.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you.
Cool. Great convo. Let me know.
Okay.
Keep sending the updates, Carl.
Will do.
Love having you on. All right. We're bringing back an old favorite, Balaji. You had a great question you submitted in advance. Everyone loved you last time, so you're on the air. You can ask your question live.
Hey, how's it going, Chris? Hey, Megan.
Great to see you again.
Hey.
Yeah, likewise. And my apologies for not having the camera on. I'm driving the kids home from soccer practice, but really excited to be on. So I wanted to ask a question about the content and the distribution. I really like the framework of thinking about it like a TV network. And the Procter & Gamble example was great. I worked at Procter & Gamble many years ago, so that resonated. I'm interested in figuring out, Chris, some ways to grow organic reach, say on LinkedIn, for example. So I'm interested in two specific scenarios. One is for the company page. So I'd love to hear some experiences of good ways to grow that organic reach for the company page. And then two is for the thought leaders at the company. Right now, for example, we have a social media manager. A lot of our thought leaders aren't necessarily going to do the legwork to grow their personal network on these social platforms. Perhaps the social media manager could help with that. So I'm trying to figure out some good ways to potentially redeploy a traditional social media manager from posting sort of PR brochureware to posting this engaging content for the audience, but they're going to need to post it either on the company profile or on the personal profiles of the thought leaders at the company. So I'd love your thoughts on that.
Totally. There's a lot to cover in there. So one clarifying question, it sounded like just in the undertones that you don't think that your thought leaders will actually post, so someone else is going to have to do it for them. Is that right?
Yeah,
I kind of heard that.
I think that I think generally that's going to be the case. And that may be the case at a lot of companies as well, where you might have one or two people who will, they can spout the content all day. I'm planning to interview these people. They've got deep insights, but they might not have the time or at present make the time to actually grow the network or post the content themselves.
So on that note, a lot of people are going to probably disagree with me with this statement, especially people that sell like managed services to manage executive LinkedIn profiles. But that's not going to fly. Like, that's not going to work. The reason is that it's not only about going in there and creating content and shouting and just pushing it out. It's about engaging. It's about understanding the audience. It's about getting the qualitative feedback in the comments to drive your content strategy. Those are the ingredients that really need to happen in order to be successful. And so it's basically like you are doing something and then not looking at the data to know whether or not you need to adjust. Get what I'm saying? Like, somebody else, a social media manager, might be able to kind of comp that, but I just don't think it's replaceable. So a lot of people will try and do this because they think that they're too busy. And the problem isn't that they're too busy. It's that they want to do something that's hard, but do it in a way that's easy, which leads to typically giving up or failing. So that's kind of like a hard truth on that note. I think that if you want to be successful here, you need to think about it. People that do it need to think about it differently to have a level of commitment where it's like, I'm going to post content. I'm going to help people. I'm going to be part of events. I'm going to join communities. I'm going to comment on people's posts. I'm going to build relationships. I'm going to answer DMs. Like, it's not just about posting the content in my view to be truly successful. And I think in the beginning of the question, you're like, I want to turn this into something that's really special. And so I just want to tell you the truth there. When it comes to the content creation, a social media manager can put together and architect a strategy and put your thought leaders in positions where they can demonstrate expertise, like getting them on podcasts, having guests come on your podcast, or you can make one up so that your people are interviewing other experts. You can put them in speaking in front of events, live events. You can create virtual events or webinars or something like this where they talk about a specific topic. All of those things are available, and the social media manager can put those things together if they can connect what the data of what the audience is telling them and things like the chat and the comments and things like that to drive what the content is. And so I did that in 2017-18, leveraging internal experts that were physicians to create that to happen. So I know that it's possible. The distribution side, it really is optimal to, in my view, to distribute from personal profiles. We run both of them here. Our company page is doing awesome and quite impactful, actually, but it takes a lot of time. And so I think they both take a long time. Let me be honest here. I've been doing this for almost 3 years straight. And so they both take quite a bit of time. I'll give you some tips to make this go a little bit faster. So one is having an audience growth strategy. So in a company page, if you're a company manager, I think you can invite a certain amount of people to like your page. As a recipient of those, it's kind of annoying, but that's a way that you can grow your audience on the company page. I think it's the only way where you can proactively go out and get new people in the audience. On the personal profiles, somebody could go out and connect with people. My recommendation is to connect with people that are engaging with content in the feed, not using Sales Navigator, because you want people that use the platform. It takes a little bit more work. It's a little bit more hand-to-hand combat, but it definitely is more effective because you want people in your audience that log into LinkedIn every day, not people that use the platform every 3 years when they're looking for a job. The next one is that you could publish content more frequently. So the idea of publishing content that a lot of company pages will do twice a month. If you did it twice a day, you'd get a lot more reach, you'd get a lot more engagement, you'd get better significantly faster. Imagine the difference in results over 6 months if you went to the gym twice a month or if you went twice a day. You'd probably be in a lot better shape after 6 months. The stuff compounds just like on this. So it's not only about like the increased reach, but your skills and capabilities and things like that also grow while you do it at a higher frequency. And those are a couple of the tips. The last one that you can consider is if you have organic content that is working on the company page, that you could boost it with ads. So taking that content, running on the company page to directly target it at who you want to see it, with the hope of them seeing your content, seeing this is helpful, clicking on the logo and clicking follow. You could probably make a follow CTA too. So those are some of the ways that you can do it. There are people that use engagement pods and things like that with fake accounts, and I don't endorse any of that stuff. I've never used any of those things before. The way to really win here is to not look for a hack. It's to create a situation where you do work that people value and then just do it and keep iterating. So that was a lot. I'd love to answer a follow-up if you got one, or maybe are you home? It feels like I talked for a while. Are you home yet? Are the kids back at home from soccer?
No, it's a long drive, but that was good. No, I think you hit the nail on the head. Ultimately, there aren't shortcuts. It's going to have to be the hard way. So I'm going to put that to work. Appreciate it, Chris.
Hell yeah. Cool, man. Good to have you on here. Thanks.
Thank you.
He has such a great speaking voice.
Mm-hmm.
Questions are so well articulated. I love it. All right, we have a few questions that were submitted in advance. While I drum up some more here, here's a quick one. Curious what you think about this.
Okay.
So Andrew said Facebook recently released social audio podcast features, and he's curious if we are planning to leverage this, if we've decided to just ignore it. He wants to get your hot take on this new Facebook feature.
So to be honest, I didn't even know this Facebook feature existed. When you think about the when I look at Facebook at its current state right now, the only two things that I'm focused on are groups and paid. And so the like organic posting, hoping someone finds my podcast, like I need to look deeper into it. But just to be clear, like those are the two places where I see high upside, and there's enormous opportunities in a lot of different places. And so like, it's almost like having to make some choices, right? Like, is Facebook podcasts a better way to deploy some of our resources, or is being the first, marketing podcasts to have video on Spotify podcasts. Would that be better? Who knows? You actually don't know. Some of these things, like people are looking for data and reports to tell them exactly what to do. That's not how it works. There's a lot of ways to win. Would it be better to have the audio podcasts on Facebook and have our team working on that? Or would it be better to use those resources to start to grow our TikTok presence, which is one of the things that we're prioritizing over this? And so that was a quick one, but that's my, just in summary, I don't know much about that feature, but just given all the other opportunities, it's not something that we're like deeply looking at right now.
All right, we'll put that in the warm take column, but I'm gonna bring Matthew on next.
And then we'll go Matthew, and then we'll go back to the agenda, and then we'll get back to questions.
Sounds good. So Matthew, you're on live. Go ahead and ask your question.
Hey, Chris. Hey, Megan. I
Hey.
really appreciate it. So I'm dealing with really, really long sales cycles. Like they could be 2 to 3 or 4 years. And I'm looking at Salesforce data, and it is saying, oh, this lead came from a trade show in 2016. Literally looking at this earlier today, and the opportunity started in 2021. And I'm trying to push this social media narrative of, use social media to create leads with content. And these things are kind of blocking me. So I'm just kind of wondering how you address really long sales cycles that, and also Salesforce data that might not be the best.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I don't think the sales cycles are that long. I think the data is bad, but how much does the product cost on average?
We'll go annual 300 to 500 grand a year.
Okay. It's pretty healthy. But when you see sales cycles that are 2 to 4 years, generally it's because a sales rep has a small territory, opens up an opportunity, and just keeps it open in perpetuity until they close the account, because they just don't have that many accounts in their territory, and like there's only so many companies going to pay you 500 grand a year. So I think that this is a data issue more than anything. Like it's weird to think, but like if you have almost anything that takes more than a year to close, is the problem that like you're defining what an actual opportunity is wrong, and when an opportunity gets won and lost. Like you might need better definitions of like, haven't connected with this person in 90 days, close lost, right? Like we set up automated rules where things like that were happening because people would basically just hoard opportunities that were going nowhere so that they didn't have to put the account back in the pool or whatever. And so I think this is more of a having guardrails about what is actually an opportunity, what's pipeline, when should it get moved to won and lost. And then I think that you probably want so that's the data side. I'm sure you want some tactical stuff too. And so would give you an opportunity to kind of ask a follow-up when we can go deeper. So I think it was like, how do you adjust to longer sales cycles? But maybe you can clarify that.
Yeah, I think you're accurate with that, but I think our sales team is pretty good about saying, oh, this isn't working. It's when you look at the data in Salesforce, it's like, oh, primary campaign is this 2016 show. And then it's like, oh, trade shows are the most important thing ever. When you start, but then you have to like really analyze everything, and you start looking at activity of, oh, they click this or whatever.
Do you use Visible?
So what?
Do you use Visible?
No, we do not.
Okay. So how does primary campaign source get set?
Again, I honestly don't have a good answer to this. I think it might be, it's when someone clicks on something. So I'm sorry, I don't have a great answer. Because because I'm analyzing the data. I'm not I'm actually more side of the content product marketing side versus the ops side. So I look at this data and I start seeing holes, and then I get confused on when to say this is a huge error.
So it's a guess, but based on the data you told me, it sounds like you're in a first touch model with a relatively small TAM, which is why this stuff is happening, because there's only so many people at so many accounts, and like an opportunity that gets open 5 years later, but the first touch was at a trade show in 2016. Like that kind of makes sense. So there's part like what is the actual attribution model? And how does that get weighted? And then do you have the right tracking in place so that when somebody went to the trade show in 2016, but then 5 years later, they came to the website and said, I want a demo now, that it's being adjusted properly to say it was actually the source or the campaign type was a demo request on a trade show, and the channel was referred through organic. And so there's some data. We're probably not going to go into this level of detail, but this is a nice transition into the Rev Ops for demand marketers one. So based on what you said, I think this is mainly like a data integrity challenge. So working with the team to figure out how do we get up to speed on best practices of how to set an attribution model, how to define what the actual primary campaign source was for an opportunity. Those are some of the recommendations with the limited information that I have.
Yeah, no, I know. I think you're accurate in all of that. So thanks for the answer.
Awesome, man. Yeah, if you take that and go back and work through it and get a little bit more info and you want to keep talking about it next week, happy to do it.
Absolutely. I'll be back.
Cool.
Thanks, Matthew. All right, you're rolling into Rev Ops.
All right, yeah, a good one for demand marketers, because at the moment, or actually not even at the moment, since 2018, I've considered myself a demand marketer and a Rev Ops person. But the way that I see Rev Ops is different than how everyone else sees Rev Ops. And perhaps I need to give it a different name so that people know what I'm talking about. Maybe it's demand ops. I don't know. We'll work through it. But there's components of Rev Ops where if you are a demand marketer and you're accountable to pipeline, qualified pipeline, and revenue, that you need to understand these concepts, because they can be massive levers for you to hit your goals, exceed your targets, find new things of growth without buying more ads or creating more content. Like there's tons of inefficiencies in the actual pipeline process post-conversion that you can impact, that can make you can move your pipeline or your revenue or your MQLs or those types of things. You can move them by simply adjusting a process, changing how you track the data, enabling your team. And so when I think about a demand marketer's kind of responsibilities in Rev Ops, it's data, process, enablement, and insights. You could potentially throw tech in there as well, but there's only very specific use cases where I, as a marketer, would insert tech for this part. Typically, I'm going to leave tech out, and that would actually be more in the traditional Rev Ops side. And so on the data side, kind of like what I talked about with Matthew, when you're a demand marketer, you need to have the data in the right structure to generate the insights and make strong decisions. And so you don't need to be the one that architects all of those things. I've done it before because no one else would. So I have a good understanding of it, but you don't actually have to be the one that goes in there and presses the buttons and sets stuff up. But you need to have a vision for what data you need, where you need it, and why. So data. The next part is process. And so thinking about all the different components in a process of a modern buying journey. And so it's really interesting to think that I've pretty much gotten to a place now where I would recommend to companies that they have a completely different sales process for a person that says, hey, I want to buy your stuff and fills out a demo, versus going outbound. Right now, companies basically just blend them together. Like maybe you actually need maybe you need a different profile. Maybe you need a different team. Like I know some companies do that, but I think across the board, mainly it's not, because they want the inbounds to be spread across fairly so that it's fair for all the reps. But getting back to it, in terms of the process, like I've played around with this at several different companies, and depending on whether or not you have an SDR layer to follow up with high intent website conversions that are qualified, whether or not that person is there will dramatically impact how many people get to sit on a meeting with an AE. Or maybe that person is not needed and we can do some of the things that we've talked about before using a calendar invite. So there's a process element for when the lead converts, how do they get routed, who's following up, does somebody actually need to follow up, or can we put a calendar link? How do they get qualified? Different things like that, all the way through. And so as a marketer, you can start to look at these processes. You can listen to what buyers are saying. You can figure out where people are falling off. You can try and look at why. So there's an interesting component there. The next one is enablement. And so how do you can enable your buyers and you can enable your sellers with more information, different things like that. Buyers with available data so that they can do a lot of research on their own. They can find those different things. So working through that. And then I think one of the most underlooked is insights, and not underlooked because companies don't do it, but underlooked because they don't look at it the right way. And so as people know pretty clearly from my stance in listening to this podcast and coming to these events, like I see insights and what things are actually happening with buyers very differently than how any marketing ops or rev ops person would measure it. Because marketing ops people and rev ops people are typically data first, and I'm customer first. And so the data, like, it makes sense to me because I look at what customers are doing and saying, and then I'm like, oh, this data makes sense. Like these LinkedIn lead gen ad leads are only converting to pipeline at 1.2% because they don't actually have intent to buy, because we ran an ebook. And so there's things that you can actually like start to interpret if you start with the customer and work backwards. And if you start with that lens, you can see insights that other people don't see. And so I hope to spark some questions, because it's an interesting topic that we don't talk a lot about, but there is so much value in being able to not only generate pipeline, but also optimize the pipeline. And so I think about it like I'm not sure everyone, but a lot of people know that we're basically aligning on a high intent website funnel where people are coming through qualified saying, hey, I want to talk to your sales rep now about buying this stuff. And like, I own that funnel. I don't call it a funnel anymore. I call it a pipe. And so because the conversion rates are so good, it's not like a funnel, it's literally like straight. And I own that to think about how can it be more efficient? How can we have more stuff flowing through it? How can that stuff be flowing faster? How can we win? How can we get more people to the end? And if you really center on that as a team and look at that, there's so much opportunity for scale and efficiency when you look that way that other companies just don't do it that way. So they don't see the potential upside of, if you move from having 30 people come to your website and do that every month to 300 while maintaining the conversion rates, how much of a huge impact that would have on your business. And that is like, we've done it for a couple companies, so you can do stuff like that while maintaining or improving all of the metrics that matter: sales cycle length, win rates, ACVs, etc. And so let's jump into some questions.
All right, let's do it. We actually have a question that Anthony submitted in advance that is very Rev Ops, marketing ops related. So I think it's a good carry on to this particular topic. So he says, I'm trying to figure out how to implement a system where we can track marketing source, pipeline, and revenue without falling into the trap of traditional attribution. On a super tactical level, what steps should I take in my CRM? Said another way, I don't want to just slap credit on anything that marketing touches. But if someone fills out a form, we had them at our company event, or they engaged on paid social, how do you recommend we credit that in our CRM? Is it as simple as the "how did you hear about us" question? So maybe you can get a little tactical for Anthony to keep this thread going.
Yeah, there was a lot in there. I might need you to remind me along the way, but the short answer is, like, adding the "how did you hear about us" is definitely not enough in this case. And I'm just to clarify for people, like, I'm not suggesting that you use self-reported attribution to replace the things that you're doing right now. I'm telling you to do it to enhance and widen the scope of the things that you're measuring right now, because you're missing a lot of things. And so it's not a replacement. It really is a supplement or an addition. And And so when I think about what I'm optimizing for as a marketer, is I'm optimizing for opportunity source, which to me means like, what was the last thing that happened within a certain period of time that moved someone to buy? And so for me, and the thing that I'm optimizing, because we just talked about building this pipe, like I'm optimizing for someone coming to the website saying, I want to talk to your sales rep now, and booking a meeting directly with a calendar. And so, and if you can get that through, it's pretty clear where it came from. It came from a website conversion. And so when you look at opportunity source, the same thing could happen. Like if your SDR pulled someone out of a database or a lead or things like, you know, a recycled lead or something, and called them and then booked a meeting, then you would get credited to outbound. And so when people have rules, depending on the sales cycle length, it had to happen within 21 days, it had to happen within 30 days. But like for me, I'm looking for it to happen like pretty much right then. Like if someone asks for a demo and they don't convert into a meeting within 3 days, then we have a company have done something seriously wrong. And so like it should be almost instant. Like there's enough companies have so much tech and so much money spent on tech, but have like archaic processes to move a buyer that wants to buy into a meeting. So it should happen like that. If you're optimizing, then the reason that we align on one holistic website funnel is because that's where you calculate ROI, not at the channel level. And so you basically are looking at all of the results blended, and you can say, out of our, you know, we had a $4.5 million marketing budget in 2020, and out of the 4.5 million, we returned 9.6 million in revenue through our website to create a customer acquisition cost payback period for marketing at 5 months or whatever the math is. The industry benchmark right now is probably around 12 months, if not higher. If you look at individual lead gen channels, it's ridiculous. But if you look at it blended, it's typically somewhere between, 10 and 20 months. So you're at 5 and things are good. And then the role of attribution is for marketers to optimize a strategy, not to prove credit. So you're taking you're making your ROI measurement at the marketing level, as opposed to at the channel level. So then that frees you up to use channels in a different way. So you can use channels appropriately for things that you shouldn't be running lead gen on. You don't have to, because you don't have to measure it that way. You measure at the business level. And then when you think about attribution, then you have multi-touch attribution most likely. You have self-reported attribution. You have qualitative insights you're getting from customers. You can run win-loss analysis. You can run quantitative large-scale surveys with buyers. You can get all this information to architect the mix to drive more pipeline through your website. And that, I believe, is like truly the optimal setup. It completely, like, all of the things that are wrong with how companies use attribution get solved by moving to this model.
And I think that what would help Anthony as well, and there's been a couple of other DMs I've gotten on this as well, is can you get specific on just the systems and the technical implementation to capture some of the source data, like leveraging HubSpot, Salesforce, UTMs. There's like, people are asking on like the technical specifics of how to like actually set this up to capture those data points. So break that down.
So the two main things that I'm looking for are the campaign type, and then I'm looking for the source. Campaign type could be demo, cold call, webinar, something like that. And the source could be Google, this conference, this virtual event, this type of content syndication vendor, if that ever happens. So you can see how the differences in the source and the campaign type are. And then, could you get me back on the question?
It's just, I think like people, especially Anthony, too,
technical implementation. So, yep. So on HubSpot, HubSpot's tracking code will run the UTMs automatically if you set it up properly. So you don't have to worry about that. They do it on their own, and you don't actually need UTMs. They have their own way of doing it. And so that's super easy. You have that. So it'll track source from that point. And then after that, you have to see where did the person convert? Was it on a demo? Was it on a newsletter? Was it on content? Things like that. And you can just stamp the opportunity of when that happened. So they did a demo, stamp the time, date stamp the time that the demo happened, and you have some of the data. If you're looking at it from a Marketo Salesforce standpoint, to my knowledge, you need, unless you have Visible installed on top, you're going to need to use UTMs with Marketo. We set up UTMs most often anyway because we're also looking at Google Analytics, and this is helpful for Google Analytics. And so you have the UTM set up, and then you need to have I forget exactly the term, but you need to have persistent UTMs where if somebody's on multiple pages on your website, the UTMs don't clear. And then I think that's a Marketo setting. And then from there, someone converts, basically the same thing happens. The UTMs need to get stored in the different Marketo properties. And then it's going to get pushed into Salesforce, and then there's going to be automation to tag those different things. And if it gets converted to an opportunity, you then copy the UTMs and the source data from the primary contact to the opportunity. This is a challenging thing to communicate over like a audio podcast, but those are some of the inner workings of how it works. For companies that are kind of like entering this new, like HubSpot is a great way to get, and it gets most of the way there without you needing to do anything. Marketo is a lot more complicated to set up with Salesforce.
Yeah, I think to kind of sum that up, I think leveraging HubSpot and Salesforce, I think Anthony's using Salesforce specifically, is the easiest way to get this set up. Also implement how did you hear about us? And that's going to give you all of the data that you need to help guide decisions without blindly following exactly what the attribution is showing you. I think that's like the core takeaway for Anthony. Cool. I got some more questions that come up. Should we roll back into AMA?
Let's do it.
All right. So Amy, I'm going to bring you on. You had a couple of questions. And so we will let you ask both live. Welcome to the show.
Uh-oh.
Oh.
You there, Amy? We can't hear you.
We can't hear you. I will ask on your behalf. Let me grab your question. Better?
It's better now. Yeah. Keep it going.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Technology. So my first question is actually about, so we have that set up where it's like a request for a sales call immediately, but kind of what we're finding is when the volume for the requests are now exceeding the calendar time of our sales team. Have you heard of like an intermediary step that we could take? It's almost like that we don't do there's no SDR level. We're not qualifying prior to somebody filling out a form to talk to our sales team. And the volume is of such that they can't get to everybody anymore. So have you heard of a step where we could implement in between that form fill to them being able to book a call?
My gut tells me you don't need that extra step.
Kind of a great problem to have.
No,
talking to the sales team or
my gut tells me you don't need the second step, because if the program was driving the revenue that it would, if you didn't need it, then you would already have more sales reps to follow up with the leads, but you don't. The reason is typically because the company runs some type of low intent performance marketing with the calendar link and drives buyers that don't close into this thing. And then so you should assess the win rates from the meeting with the rep to the end. It's most likely going to be very low. And then try and tease out, because there's going to be winners where you're going to win those meetings at 12 or 15%. And there's going to be losers where you win them at less than 1%. And then starting to figure out, okay, I only want to have people book meetings on the calendars for my rep that come from these specific sources that I know convert at a high rate. And so that way you have less meetings, right? You have less meetings that convert at 10x or more better to customer. Right. And that's the process. So this is kind of like Rev Ops for demand marketers, what I talk through. It's like, it's our job as marketers to to look at the data, the performance data to close one, and make assessments about what are the which people should I send that give our sales team the highest probability to win? It's the number. It's the thing that people. I'm glad you asked the question, because it's the number one thing people don't understand when I say you should put a calendar link on. It's like, not if you're generating a bunch of shitty leads that don't convert.
Right. No, that makes
yeah.
perfect sense. That makes perfect sense that we could segment who gets the link immediately and who we know has lower conversions and do something different. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and so there's two components in here. When you say who, there's fit and there's intent.
Right.
So fit is black and white, right? So, and you can do that like using a tool called Clearbit to pre-qualify and decide whether or not they get the calendar. If you want to be complex, you can do it that way. Or like what we do, we don't do that. But if somebody shows up on a calendar that's clearly not a good fit, then we just route them and basically say, hey, this isn't going to be a good fit for this reason. Like, we're going to clear the meeting to save each other time. Here are some resources, or here are alternative vendors, or whatever we decide to do. And so on fit, it's like black and white clear. Like an AE could do that themselves. If the volume's relatively low, you could have a manager that goes through and does it, or there's different options. And the overlooked piece is intent, because that one's harder to glean. It's harder to tell, but the sources of where people come from is a predictor of this. And so as a marketer, I know that if I run this type of play using LinkedIn ads, that our no-show rates are going to be super high, that our sales team is going to say these people are not in buying cycles, that things are going to be moving to close lost. And I know if I'm optimizing for people that come through direct traffic or branded search or things like that, that they're going to be ready to buy, they're going to convert, that our sales team is going to give us good feedback on the quality of the conversations, and then starting to just optimize our marketing to only, it's not going to be perfect, right? You're going to have some things, but you can actually like look at the different sources and almost cut them out of the mix.
Okay.
With the goal of like, do you have the data on you? I'd love to do you have, what's the show rate? What's the conversion rate from opportunity after that? Do you have some of that data?
I mean, I do, not top of mind,
yeah.
but we do have it. I mean, I could go into, the attribution of, I know exactly which ones are closing at higher rates. I know exactly which ones are even that piece of it. Like I know, like our influencer partnerships are great where Google is not, right? So yeah, even that.
Yeah. I just, this is more for everyone else, but I first learned this in, I think I learned it at a different time, but I saw it in real practice in 2019, which is that like I could just run performance marketing on Facebook ads and get exactly the titles and the companies through lead gen or direct response conversions, and then that would get pushed to SDRs or it would get moved directly to AEs. And the feedback was that the people just like didn't answer the calls or just said they hadn't heard about us or weren't converting. And then it started to become clear that like that the intent of the level of buying intent to complete, even like that was transactional. It was like $2,000 a year. But even in transactional sales, people need enough intent to go through and complete a process because it requires organizational change for the most part. And that's where people get stuck. And then they're like, oh, like I filled out this form, but do I really want to go and get John on board? And do I really want to go through this like 90-day implementation? No, I'm going to just keep going back to what I'm doing.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
That was a good one. Thank you.
Do I have time for my other one?
Yeah, keep it going. Yeah, of course.
Okay. Excellent. So we launched a podcast last year. Last year it was like, great, let's just see how it goes. So it's run a year course. We're getting ready to do strategy for season 2, and we are now being asked to bring ROI to the table for part of the season 2 strategy. So we do outsource the production of the podcast. So there is some cost outside of, our team time, but other than the metrics of client gain, which we've had one that we can track back to the podcast, what are some other metrics? Because they're open to it. What are some other metrics we could bring to the table, or some other things that we could do to further the conversation? I mean, I think we want to continue it from a content generation perspective, but would love to get your thoughts on that.
How'd you track back the one?
We have a how did you hear about us?
And they said podcast.
And I said our podcast by name.
Cool. Are you getting more of those, but they just haven't converted to revenue, or is it just a one-off there?
I mean, I think we've gotten maybe it's one off here, one off there. It's nothing significant in comparison to the volume of other things that we do.
Have you had the How Did You Hear About Us for a long time?
Mm-hmm.
So you've had the podcast running for a year, and you've had the How Did You Hear About Us pretty much running for the same amount of time, and you've only had a couple of instances where people say it?
Yes.
Yeah. So this sounds like a effectiveness challenge, actually. So how many episodes, let's go deep into it. How many episodes have you done?
40, 45.
Okay. How many downloads do you get per episode?
Around averaging about 400.
Okay. What's the podcast about?
Thought leadership on small business.
Got it. And what are you selling to small business?
Staffing services, virtual assistants, bookkeepers.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so you're talking through best practices for like finance or staffing or operations or tax or stuff like that.
Right.
Got it. Have you considered why people choose you over other options? Like why do your buyers, like there's a lot of staffing services for small business, I imagine. Like why do people choose you over someone else?
US based, premium, super easy, onboarding processes.
Mm-hmm. I think that's the thing. So I think it's about really narrowing in on what is special about us. What or who do we deliver this to that's unique and special, that makes people get significantly more value because we're more specific about who we serve it to, so it's more customized, or because we do it in this specific proprietary way, which is new and whatever, or like those types of options. And then once you figure that out and you validated that is what customers respond about why they continue to use you, it's about and then it's about architecting a narrative that can go on the podcast that shows people, that talks through why they need to think about changing to the things that you're doing and why it's important for their business. And so I think it's a little bit of like a content shift in order to really get results from a podcast. I'll let you react to that.
I mean, yeah, I think at this point we're open to anything.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can see how if we went back to the themes that always work well for us in the content that we always do, how that we know works well and that our audience wants to hear about,
Mm-hmm.
that could have a different effect, or at least a different audience that's going to resonate with the mindset of transitioning into what it is that we actually provide as a service.
Yeah, and it's kind of the thing that I'm trying to kind of narrow in on here is the difference between your buyers thinking and knowing that you do something special that's specific to them versus them seeing, I could use this or 5 other companies that I find in Google, whatever. Like you're probably more expensive, you know what I mean? So you're in a place where it's like you need to be able to differentiate somehow. Services are sometimes difficult to do this, but having a perspective and a point of view can really help in the marketing, because the marketing can do a lot of damage too. The second piece that I'll go into, so that's one side. I think it's about finding why people buy specifically from you, why they stay, and what they like most about working with you. And then I would weave that into messaging and content strategy for the podcast. And then on the distribution side, aside from people like stumbling upon it, searching for small business tips or things in podcast platforms, how do people find it?
We run LinkedIn, Facebook ads,
Mm-hmm.
towards the podcast, actually towards the resources and the show notes of the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Having the podcast actually be the secondary part,
Yeah,
but the content value being the first.
I've found that generating subscribers that actually listen through paid is actually very expensive and challenging. It's also really difficult to track with the App Store downloads and things like that. Right. And so it's something that I've stopped doing several years ago, because I would run it and then I would see people clicking on the ads and going through. We would have no tracking on it because it's not an owned property. We're not going to put a pixel on the Apple app podcast store. And then we just didn't see downloads or users going up in any meaningful way. So we kind of like pivot, and I've done that for several different podcasts, and we kind of pivoted on it. I think you need to find an organic channel where you can take the things that you're doing on podcasts, like what we do on LinkedIn, to distribute, one, as a way to drive demand, right? In a micro format, you're already doing the podcast. It's not that much of a lift to go a little bit further. So that's one. And then to use it as a mechanism for user acquisition. And so one of the best ways to get people into short form content, aside from like having a topic that a lot of people search for and then optimizing for that based on reviews and search and different things along those lines, is to create micro content so people understand your point of view and perspective. And then because they want to go deeper, and then they listen to a podcast. So it's kind of like, and then we can talk through the ROI, but those are two like tactical tips. You could do story and narrative, and then distribution through video to drive subscribers.
Okay.
When you think about the ROI from there, you have self-reported. So like, let's say that, I don't know what your ACV is and we don't need to get into it. So let's just say that for the sake of the conversation, say you had $100,000 deal, right? That might have a decent return for the entire work of the podcast post-production for the entire year. I'm not sure. Right. So the cost, I'm not very clear on the cost of the podcast. I'm not really clear on the return, but that's kind of like what you could get. And then you need to think about all of the ways that the podcast otherwise contributes to the company and try and put those into place. So the idea that the podcast feeds LinkedIn, and then LinkedIn becomes a customer acquisition channel, right? So you can't actually get LinkedIn without the podcast in this model. So it's kind of like extending the channels where the ROI can get attributed. Because I'm not looking at channels when I do this stuff. I'm looking at, we're doing one activity and it's going across different places, but whether or not like we were going to do the activity anyway of have the event and film the podcast, we might as well chop it up and put it on LinkedIn. We might as well put it on YouTube. We might as well start to optimize, right? So you can kind of grow from there. So other channels where it can deliver results, you can try and take screenshots and other things of what people are saying or what reviews as a qualitative mechanism. You can try to like somehow quantify if it's impacting current customers, whether current customers are listening to it or not, and how it could impact retention. So there's a lot of different angles here, but like the couple of last ideas I said are in my view are reaching. Like you should be able to drive to demonstrate positive ROI on a podcast just by using how did you hear about us and extending it to other channels.
Okay. That's super helpful. Thank you.
That was fun. Happy to help.
Thanks, Amy. Good to have you on. All right, got 3 more people up for questions.
Holy cow, we're going deep again this time. We went late last weekend too, or last week.
Yeah,
let's do it.
These will be 3 good ones.
Yeah, I'm ready for it.
Stephanie, I'm bringing you on next. I believe you had a TikTok question.
I do have a TikTok question, but then Chris made kind of a quick comment about something else, and I realized, wow, this is actually a way better subject. But I'll ask my TikTok question first. So you mentioned that Refine Labs is focusing on TikTok now. We're enterprise B2B. Our customers are Fortune 250. Our ARR is $300,000 a year. I mean, I get a lot of pushback when I bring up any other channel besides LinkedIn, maybe Twitter.
Yep.
What's the best use case for other platforms like TikTok now in B2B sales? I'd love to hear any feedback there.
So the idea here is that where TikTok is at right now is probably Instagram in 2013 or 14. And so at that point, the 45-year-old woman, the 55-year-old man was not using Instagram. But the people that built there, and then as they were building over time, more people came in that were older and different things, where Instagram basically is everybody now, right? And so the concept here is that it's clear that TikTok is going to be a major player. It's not even close anymore. And it's clear that from the age demographic data that people that are inside of age groups that influence and make decisions for B2B purchases are starting to spend time there. And so laying the groundwork so that you understand how to produce content, that you have a presence, so that you have followers, that people like what you're doing, that you have operational capabilities to execute there for in the next 18 months when your real buyers start moving there at scale, that you're not playing catch up, that you know what to do, that you're not embarrassed when you can't produce anything that anyone likes. Like, that's the mode that I think that a company like yours should be in, which is that it's like there were some companies that built strong on Instagram that continue to reap rewards. HubSpot was one of them, although I think that their organic content strategy there could be better and at a better cadence, but they have a good presence there and they get a lot of engagement, and they've probably been having quite a bit of success there. And so this is not a I'm going to go and create content for TikTok and get leads next week. It's right. If we go out and we spend a lot of time and we become the best company that markets to Fortune 500 companies in the world through TikTok, that in 18 months it could change our business.
Okay, that makes sense. That's fair. Okay, real quick, I'm going to put in the other question. You mentioned offhand real quick a comment about industry trade pubs. And I would love to get back the industry trade pub budget for 2022. But it's a bit of that kind of air cover mentality, right? And so our leadership looks at the optics of not being there. And I'm pushing back saying they had 250 readers last month on their digital trade pub. Like, we don't need to be there. So, what are your thoughts? Are there optics that are involved there? Like, do you need to be in the industry trade magazine to be part of the industry?
No. No, maybe you did in 2008, right? And okay. A lot of the executives at companies were executives or were like main contributors of businesses at that time, where the main places that people got information in, let's just say 2011 to make it realistic, analyst firms, Google search, and trade publications and conferences. Right. And over time, because of the maturity of the internet and the availability of content that's scaled through the internet, that buyers don't need to go to your conference anymore in order to get that stuff. They don't need to look at your magazine. It's on the internet all over the place, everywhere. And so the way, because the company that I worked for did this, right? So I was a B2B marketer in the first 5 or 6 years of my career, first 5 years of my career at a couple of different companies, spent a lot of time going to trade shows, building booths, looking around and being like, I know we're spending a lot of money here and it doesn't feel like we're getting anything out of it. Like, we're having some conversations, collecting people, and like we weren't using a CRM, but the feel was like, there's got to be a better way to do this. Yes. You know what I mean? I'm just thinking differently. And then I actually went and started measuring them, because the company that I worked for, out of $1.8 million variable marketing budget, they spent $1.2 million on trade show booths and sponsorships. And it just was consuming the whole budget in like 2017. And I was like, okay, we go to 11 shows. I'm going to start to measure the results of this, because I've gone to the shows. And all that happens is that the 4 people that are there get drunk for 3 days. We have a couple of conversations, and then nothing comes out of it. And we have a booth there. And so it's like, it's the optics. Like, people again, companies go back and they say, we're so data driven. We look at data and we make decisions, but they're not. It's emotional decisions. Like, the data is there right in front of you, that the trade publication and a lot of the conferences have negative ROI. And the opportunity cost of not doing something else is very high, because it consumes budget in companies and restricts the company from moving forward into things that actually are going to work in the future, like today and into the future. So when people say like we need to be there, or people like, what's the quote when the people go to the conferences? Oh, but if our booth isn't there, people will think that we went out of business and they're going to go to all our competitors' booths. I'm like, what? Like no buyer is showing up at a conference and at any point looking for your booth. They're like they're attending the conference. So those are some of my takes, nothing like super actionable except measuring, like just measuring it and presenting it to people, because those people don't look at the returns on those things. They just like remember how it worked when it was a different time.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Happy to help.
Thanks, Stephanie. All right, this is a fun one. Tim has a fun, like, hypothetical debate. Let me bring you on, Tim. Get into it.
Yeah, it's not really hypothetical. It was a conversation I had earlier today. Thanks, Megan.
Oh, so it's real.
Yeah. So Chris, I think this might be a little softball for you, and I think you might say what I expect, but MQL. So using HubSpot, you've got this great marketing automation engine, and just imagine MQL that's what the automation's for. It's not quite good enough to really, do outbound to them and really engage with them. So one idea is just load it up with low bar. Doesn't really matter. Just load it up. You never really know. Maybe in a year, maybe 2 years, they'll turn around and they'll give you a call. The other approach is, no, it does matter. And we want to really focus on people who actually might care to buy our services. And I don't know, hypothetically, let's say the net is actually the same. You get the same conversion, the number of conversions out of each option. Is there any reason why you would choose one or the other?
To what? To build the database, or
just
Or here,
I guess it would be a test case. I mean, more than anything else, because we don't have the data to say one works better than the other. I mean,
let me interject here. Let me help you out. I think what you're trying to say is, what you wrote to me was, assuming that you have the same outcome, is there a preference in strategy if you just run email nurture automation to a high volume of contacts, leads, MQLs, versus a lower volume approach to high intent buyers, and you're making the assertion that the conversion to revenue will be the same whether you run the high volume low intent or the low volume high intent? Is there a benefit to choosing one or the other if the outcome is the same? I think that's what you're trying to propose, right?
Exactly.
The outcome is the same, but the conversion rates would be different, right? But so it's mainly the outcome's the same. So for me, when I think about this, I'm always going for the lower volume, higher efficiency, because it scales better. Because when you have lower efficiency, it drives a headcount model. It drives you needing more SDRs. It drives you needing more sales reps, because you win opportunities at 8% instead of 25% like you should. You pay way more for every lead that you process through. And so that's like
So even with that automation, at some point, your SDR is going to have to be involved, and that's headcount, and that requires more effort.
Yeah, and the efficiency, like, I don't think that people really understand, because they blend MQLs together, the efficiency differences between these. Like, in a lot of cases, if you're running things like content syndication, paid social lead gen, even like low intent paid search lead gen on content, things like that, that you're going to need 100 times more leads to hit the same revenue target. And when you like create that thing, so let's say you need like 10,000 to hit your revenue target, and then you have to 100x that, and you got to go out and get, what is that? I think that's 1 million. Like a million leads with those conversion rates in order to hit the same revenue target, assuming the standard like benchmark conversion rates that I see across almost every company that does those tactics. And so as it scales, it gets to a place where it's literally impossible, which is typically when companies start to call us, because they realize they're like, hey, like, 1 year we were at 12,000 leads, and then what we did is we looked at the target and we realized we had to triple it to keep going on our path, and then we tripled it, but we didn't really hit the target, and now all of a sudden we're generating 100,000 leads a year, spending a ton of money, and we're not really sure how it's working, what's it going to go. We have a ton of SDR headcount that's unproductive, and you get to a place where, so like, it would be the easiest equivalent for people to really understand here. The way that I look at like these types of systems is if we were building a manufacturing facility. And we're building a manufacturing facility where we take in parts and then we have to put them together to create a new product, and then it goes out the door and we can sell it. And then the inbound parts are leads. And every time a lead comes in that isn't good, that somebody goes in and we start to create a widget, and then halfway down the assembly line, we realize that part was false and we have to throw it out, that we wasted all that time. And then you do that over and over and over again, and your manufacturing facility is very inefficient. And so that's where like the like Toyota, whatever they did, Six Sigma or things like that really get in. And like, I'm trained on some of those things. I look at processes in that way. And so people have been sold an idea that volume is the answer. It's usually almost never the answer in my experience. It's the answer if you can maintain the stability of the system through volume, but that doesn't happen very often.
That's a great analogy. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Happy to help. Good question.
Thanks, Tim. All right, I'm bringing in my closer, Nelson. You're going to be the closing question tonight.
Hey.
Nice.
I know the keynote I think usually goes first, but this time will be last.
Cool.
No, but hey everyone. So off the back of that one, actually, about volume versus or quantity versus quality. I guess people often do think that they need more quantity.
So really most people think, yeah.
Yeah, but it's really just more quality. And I guess one of the ways, maybe you can confirm it, add anything else to it, is just to segment your conversion rates by lead source. To basically say like, oh, wow, we were blending it all together and come out with a blended average. But if we actually segment it out, we realize where the goods are really coming from, where the junk is coming from. So let's just double down on the goods and allocate our marketing there. Right. And
I literally just did this with a company this morning and found $991,000 in annual expense that was completely wasted with things that have customer acquisition cost payback periods of more than 36 months. So on a $5 million annual marketing budget, there was literally 20% of it that was being completely wasted. The data was obvious.
Wow.
And so it's like that, and it's not the first time. It happens almost every time. So yes, this is the exact solution, is by looking through lead sources and then calculating not only conversion rates, but if you're running lead gen or direct response, you should also be looking at cost per opportunity and CAC.
Yeah, that's a good point. CAC too. The other thing is like, I think I've heard as a benchmark that the conversion rates closed won is like 30% in sales. Like that's kind of a benchmark. And, then that got me thinking, it's like, wow, well then you're losing 70%. And I'm just like wondering, like, should the benchmark be so low? Like, should it be much higher? It's like, well, then you'd ask yourself, well, why are you losing 70%? Like you look into the CRM and you look at your close lost, and you look at the close loss reason. Hopefully that gets filled out. But to you, does that seem strange that 30% is sort of kind of the average? Like, should it not be higher? And what do you recommend there?
I mean, this is all dependent on definitions and how this gets measured, right? So like, depending on where you set where you're going to measure win rates, it could be, 0.1%, or if you measure at stage 6 of an opportunity, it could be 90%. And so the lack of a standardized definition of what a qualified opportunity is one of the reasons why this data doesn't play very well. Because we work with companies, and some companies measure win rate on stage 1 ops that haven't even met with a buyer yet. Other companies measure it on stage 3 ops. Other ones are in stage 2. And so one of the things that we're about to implement and really trying to do at Refine Labs is give everyone a consistent definition for how to measure marketing and about what a qualified opportunity means. We've created our own definition along with other parts of the process that are important. So if people use a standard measurement system, then they can actually compare benchmarks against one another. But when you get to the 30%, again, it depends on what qualified is, but if we look at what most companies will consider qualified and by their own standard definition, you typically see something between, I would say, 15 and 30%, but it's typically on the lower end, not the higher end. For us, like our own data is 37% of qualified opportunities move to close one. So to your question about whether we should be striving for more, it's an interesting question. But again, like if you were striving for a higher win rate, you would just move qualified later stage.
Yeah, I was thinking demo request to close one.
Oh, there's a like a natural balance where like achieving those types of rates without a product led like self checkout type of deal would be I believe like close to impossible and suboptimal. And so I think there's a steady state where I say 20% of qualified opportunities, and the typical rate that we see from a demo request website not on performance marketing to close one is somewhere between 4 and 10% raw. I think our raws are 12%. So like you get a I think our conversion rates are some of the best because of how we market and the way that we're not driving volume that we don't think is going to close. And those are our rates, like 12% of raw submissions and 37% of opportunities that become qualified.
Gotcha. And then if I may keep you a bit while longer.
Yeah.
So I think this could be helpful for the folks here on tonight who are listening as a quick win, low hanging fruit type of thing. So you talk about the people who come inbound, the demo request, the high intent buyers. And we were talking earlier about manual qualification and demo scheduling versus automatic on the website, automatic qualification and booking a meeting right from a seller's calendar. So based on what you've seen, because I think this could be a good quick win for people, especially going to Q4 and improving, converting these folks. What have you seen as the difference in conversion rates between manual versus automatic, and also the difference in how long it takes on average for that meeting to actually occur with sales? So if you do it manually, does that meeting actually occur 2 weeks later on average versus automatically where the meeting occurs 2 days, 3 days later? And then, so that's kind of like the speed to meeting, I guess.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is, so say folks to help folks move towards the automatic version, what are the actionable steps or process tactics like technology look like so that, you can move towards a more automated version of not only demo scheduling, but the qualification bit?
We've worked with companies that were converting like less than 20% of qualified demos into an actual meeting with the manual method. I would say that the average for people is probably somewhere between 30 and 45, but probably less than 50 into a meeting. And with the automated, we've moved companies, like I mentioned that example, from like less than 20 to close to like 60 to 80. And so this is the thing that I mentioned before, like you can literally like more than 2x the pipeline that you deliver by just fixing this part of the process, which is incredibly impactful for companies that are generating a lot of pipeline and have some good volume. And so that's one of it. I don't have data on how quick the speed to lead one is, but I'll talk through a couple of different ones, and then I'll just note on ours, like our conversion rate from submission to meeting that we want to have is like 99% using this method. It also has to do with how we market. But it can be that high where basically everyone that schedules a meeting with your rep sits on that meeting and wants to buy stuff. When we think about the implementation, there's ways to get this done like what we do, which I think is like a lower tech way that can definitely work. Or if you're like a company, what companies will do is they'll put together this big tech roadmap and overcomplicate stuff so that it's 100% automated and never get anything done and never implement it because they're like, oh, this is impossible. And so on the enterprise end, you can buy Clearbit and Lean Data and integrate it with Marketo and Salesforce and I think Chili Piper together and all of those things. And you can automatically like qualify your leads, route them to the right person, present the calendar, have that go up. Like there's ways to get it done, but that is a major lift. And if you have a lot of reps, like that's difficult, like really difficult to implement the technology to have that happen flawlessly in a company in the way that you want. And so I'm suggesting that instead of just like skipping the SDR step and trying to automate this all out, the companies rethink the entire process. Where potentially, here are a couple of different options that you could do. Potentially, you have people, buyers that are coming inbound, and they get presented with a group of calendars for 5 reps or 10 reps or things like that. And the buyer has the most options of available times that exist. And then the buyer picks the time that works best for them, and then it gets routed based on some level of priority and round robining or geographic, however you want to decide who it actually goes to. So you're giving the buyer the most options, and then you're figuring out the back half the other way. Another option is to have one calendar where it's wide open completely. The buyer picks their own time. And then there's a SDR manager or a sales assistant or whatever you want to call them that actually works through and looks at it, makes sure that it's qualified. If it's unqualified, is going to send them an automated email that disqualifies them and cancels the meeting. If it is qualified, they're going to look and figure out who is the rep, and then they're going to put it on that calendar. If that rep's not available, they're going to find the next best person and they're going to do it. So the buyer gets the meeting when they want, and we work in the back end to give the customer what they want. Like we had a 2,000 person company today that submitted a request, book a strategy call with us at 10 a.m. And we had the call with 3 people from that company at 4:50 today. And so that's where you want to get to as a company. And it was a great call, and they were a great fit, and things are good. Other companies wait 2 weeks to even have that first call, and by then momentum's lost. They've already considered other people. So the crafting a buying process that matches what your customer wants is it's just so impactful and so simple. It's tough to. I feel like I've been on the soapbox for years now.
Awesome, that was great. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Nelson.
Nice.
Always love having you on. All right, closing thoughts. I felt like you said you were going to open with a joke and then didn't. You want to
the
close
joke
out
was
with
the
one?
air cover. Nobody laughs at it, right?
Oh.
It's getting some likes on Twitter. But yeah, if you ever hear a B2B marketer say that campaign was for air cover, it's almost guaranteed that campaign drove 0 results.
Oh, I remember now. That was funny.
Ha ha ha. Yep. Same thing about when they say, "Hey, we're doing that display ad for brand," or "We're running the trade magazine for brand." When they do it that way, it also means we're not going to scrutinize this against results because it's generating no results. So we're just going to chalk it up to brand and keep doing it because that's what we want to do. Cool. So closing thoughts. We've had a couple long extended episodes. I'm feeling awesome. We also had a great level of attendance here. We got the new studio going on. So there's a couple of big announcements that are coming from us. So expect those probably within the next month. So we'll do a little drum roll, get people excited. But there are some big evolutions at what we're doing here at Refine Labs. And so looking forward to sharing all of those when they're available with you. And until then, have a great week, and let's catch up next Tuesday.
Have a great week,
See you, everyone.
See you next Tuesday.
Bye. Hey, everyone. This is Chris Walker, the CEO of Refine Labs. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. If you enjoyed it, feel free to like, comment, or subscribe to the channel for more videos in the future. We're also live for Demand Gen Live at 7:30 p.m. Eastern every Tuesday night, which will also go on the State of Demand Gen podcast, which is available on Apple and Spotify. Thanks again, and see you next time.